My name is Richard Medhurst, and I'm here in Blackburn with former British Ambassador Craig Murray, who is running for Parliament for this constituency. Craig has been officially endorsed by the Palestinian Foreign Ministry. Craig, perhaps start out with telling us why you decided to run for Parliament and why you chose this constituency in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I should say it was entirely the genocide in Gaza which made me run, and particularly the Labour Party's attitude to it. The Labour Party having been captured by the Zionist lobby and the Friends of Israel. The fact that they were initially refusing to call for a ceasefire at all, then for a so-called sustainable ceasefire and all kinds of conditions on the ceasefire. The fact the Labour Party refuses to call for a halt to arms sales for Israel, refuses to say it will recognise the state of Palestine. It seemed to me that the failure of the democratic system, the fact that both parties are united in strong Zionist support for Israel, meant there had to be a challenge at this general election. And I chose Blackburn because this is where I challenged Jack Straw over the Iraq War in 2005.
Yeah, we all remember him.
Yeah, so I came and stood here against him as an anti-war candidate in 2005. And I knew this place has a very strong Muslim community, which provides a bedrock of support for Palestine and bedrock of anger at the situation in Gaza, of the genocide. Although it's not confined to the Muslim community by any means. Those feelings are found equally strongly in the white community here. That's why Blackburn.
And what about the media coverage? Have they blackballed you, so to speak? Are they ignoring your candidacy? Because you do have the strongest candidacy in the constituency, and yet the mainstream media don't seem to be talking about it or doing many interviews. Why do you think that is?
It's fascinating, isn't it? No, I mean, the mainstream media, I had 30 seconds on BBC Radio Lancashire the other day. Wow. Other than that, I've not seen the mainstream media at all. And they're not covering the collapse of the Labour vote. It's really interesting. They're obviously, Keir Starmer is the establishment's man, and the media are going all out to promote him and the narrative of a Labour landslide victory. But in any normal election, this is a die-hard Labour constituency. It's been Labour for 100 years.
Yeah.
And at this time of a general election campaign, normally, every other house would have a Labour Party poster. Place would be a sea of red. I've seen, I think, in 4 weeks of campaigning, I think I've seen 2 Labour Party posters in houses. Yeah, the Labour Party is virtually entirely absent. Support for the Labour Party has simply evaporated. And the media, it's not just my candidacy they're not studying, the collapse of the Labour vote, they're just not reporting it at all.
Yeah. And how is it, how do you appeal to voters? Because you said that this constituency has been diehard Labour. How do you appeal to them to switch their vote? Or do you think the Palestinian issue is a reason in and of itself?
There are a huge number of people who are furious at Labour over the Palestinian issue and Labour's failure to stand up against a genocide. That in itself is a powerful motivator. But of course, the Labour Party is letting them down in far more ways than that. Labour has abandoned any radicalism in its policies. It has fully embraced austerity. In fact, it is directly promising it will have more economic austerity than the Tories. It will cut immigration more than the Tories. It will spend more on nuclear weapons than the Tories. Labour is completely 100% attacking the Tory party from the right. And the Tory party is close to far right. So to get right of that, the Labour Party has had to go a very long way.
Yeah, the Overton window has shifted entirely to...
The Overton window has shifted a huge amount. The Labour Party currently is well to the right of Margaret Thatcher in terms of its economic policies and its defence policies and its foreign policy.
Can I ask you, Craig, were you to be elected, what are some of the avenues and mechanisms that you would appeal to and use in your employ to try and stop the genocide in Gaza?
I was already active in helping initiate the movement for a prosecution of Israel at the ICJ over genocide. I was there in the court for the case. I helped in lobbying the South African government and other governments to get the case brought. And I'd certainly be able to do more of that as a Member of Parliament. And I've spoken to the UN Human Rights Committee in December. And again, my access would be improved. I already have an international profile as a human rights activist. And
right, so you have a network that you can use more potently.
Exactly. As an MP, I would have a better platform. And I would have more media access as well. Even the UK media would find it difficult to ignore me totally if I were an MP. And also, our next, we've got further campaigns to come. And the next big push is to get Israel expelled from the United Nations by the United Nations General Assembly. And that's something which I would directly take on as soon as I was elected as MP, lobbying for that. So yes, but there are many things I want to do. I want to stress that I studied economics under Jeffrey Sachs. I've been the rector of the university. I know about the economy. I know about education. I know about a great many subjects, so I can do all the normal stuff an MP is expected to do as well. But my speciality, if you like, is international relations, foreign affairs, defence, and that's where I think I can really bring something extra, which the people want.
This morning, Nigel Farage was on Sky News. Not that I'm particularly keen on talking about him, but he declared that reform was the opposition to Labour. What do you think of that statement?
It's true in a sense, in that the Tory party is collapsing, and a lot of the Labour vote is going to reform. The main problem we face in terms of domestic policy is massive wealth inequality, and the way that the entire system, the entire structures of our financial system are skewed to increase capital and to concentrate capital, which results in widespread poverty, over 4.5 million people living below the poverty line, over 4.5 million children, I think, living below the poverty line, and leads to massive concentration of wealth, where the world is heading towards its first trillionaire. And there are, even here in Blackburn, there are billionaires. And yet there are people living in great deprivation. And of course, what the right wing do is point the finger at immigrants and say, the reason you have no money is not that that guy over there has got all the money and resources and is a billionaire. It's because that poor immigrant is eating. That it's that immigrant, he's the cause of your poverty. And that's, when you see it clearly, it's such a stupid trick that it's amazing anybody falls for it, but people do. And the competition, and Labour have joined that. I mean, Labour and Reform are in a kind of competition to say how many boat people they're going to sink and how many asylum seekers they're going to fly away, and just this crazy, nasty pandering to racism has become the common currency of the election campaign.
When you were talking about the ICJ earlier, you spoke about how you got the case off of the ground, and I just want to ask if you could perhaps go into a little bit more detail on that, because I think people are really interested to know the inner workings of this. How did you? Because you were not only inside the court. Again, you were behind the scenes in a sense. And perhaps you can just explain a bit more about that, because it is really the first time we see the Israelis being held to account in a world court.
Yeah, I was in Washington at a meeting to lobby for Julian Assange, organising lobbying for Julian Assange. And a prominent American journalist, a State Department correspondent called Sam Husseini, who is the guy who asks all the best questions of the State Department spokesman about Gaza. He really pins them down. And Sam said to me, why is nobody activating the Genocide Convention? Had I thought of it as a former diplomat? And to be honest, I hadn't thought of it, or it had only crossed my mind briefly until Sam mentioned it to me. And I knew under the Genocide Convention that any country could take any state party could take any other state party to the International Court of Justice for genocide. It was only when I read it closely that I recalled that it's more than that. Any state party has a duty to take any other state party to court if they believe them to be not just not have committed genocide, but to be committing genocide or imminently likely to commit genocide. So it's very strong. If you think that country is going to commit genocide, you have a legal duty to take action, to take it to the ICJ to try and stop it. And I thought, this is tremendous. This is what we need to do. So I wrote a couple of articles, because this is not, I mean, bluntly, it's not terrifically widely known, even in the diplomatic corps. So I wrote a couple of articles explaining its operation, explaining how it works, how it's worked in the past cases, how it should work now. And I published them on my website, and we started a lobbying exercise with various people involved. Sam Husseini being one of them. Roger Waters was another one. Stella Assange was also involved in lobbying, and I was involved in lobbying. I was based at the UN in Geneva doing the lobbying of delegations there. And eventually news came to me. I was just actually checking my messages to check how I first knew this. Andrew Feinstein was also involved in the lobbying, and having just checked my messages, I see it was actually Stella who first told me that it was going before the South African cabinet, and that my articles were with the South African foreign minister directly. And I then received a further message saying that I should write a letter to President Ramaphosa, who I had met when a Foreign Office diplomat many years ago. And I did write a letter to him. So I was involved in the, if you like, in getting the germ of the idea and the basic thoughts on how to do it into the South African political system. I would put it no higher than that. Of course, I didn't actually write the case. I mean, their lawyers did the most fantastic job. Their lawyers
you had a front row seat,
brilliant
so to
job.
speak. Yeah.
I literally had a front row seat at the ICJ, and it was great to see. I really,
it was meticulous.
It was. I really was so impressed by the way they outlined it, and especially the South African team started by saying that they could show atrocity pictures all the time.
Yeah.
But they were not going to do that. They were going to outline cold, hard facts, not rely on emotion.
Right.
And they stuck to that, and it was extremely well done. But yes, I mean, I'm prouder than I have ever been of anything in my entire life, that I had a role in pushing forward the initial idea in a way that reached the South African government. I'm extremely proud of that. But I'm not claiming I was part of the South African legal team, which actually took the case there.
The Genocide Convention, it says in Article 1 that people should both punish and prevent genocide from happening. What do you think of the Yemeni blockade?
Yeah, no, I think Yemen is perfectly justified in what it's doing. The Yemenis are one of a few countries that's actually done anything to try to prevent the genocide. Of course, more countries have now joined the South African case. Other countries have come in behind. So there are other countries trying to stop this genocide. But in terms of practical action, as far as I'm concerned, the Yemeni action is perfectly justified under the Genocide Convention. They are attempting to stop a genocide, as is Iran. I think I think Iran's role has been commendable. I'm not going to support any prescribed organisations because I would immediately go to jail. But if you cannot offer armed resistance to Israel, what is there to do other than die? And to me, the resilience of the Palestinian people and the fact you cannot destroy belief and faith with bombs is what we have seen. And unoccupied people do have the right of armed resistance. It's simply true. It's a simple statement of a basic fact of international law that nobody can deny. Unoccupied people have the right of armed resistance.
Right, and that extends also to Lebanon and Syria, because I think people tend to forget that Israel occupies other countries as well.
Absolutely. The Golan Heights, for example, where Rupert Murdoch has a share in the gas fields. It's extraordinary that Israel has been getting away with it for so long. But I think we've taken the first steps towards ending impunity, and that's extremely important because it's only by ending impunity you discourage other genocides.
Yeah. the Genocide Convention is, of course, incorporated into domestic British law. Um, how realistic is it that we can actually prosecute people like Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, who have publicly defended this genocide and supplied weapons for it as well?
Once the International Court of Justice has made its final decision on the substantive case, one of the amusing things is the Israelis say, of course, oh, they didn't find genocide. Well, they can't. They're not allowed to at this stage. All they can find is that there's a plausible risk of genocide, and therefore there's a case to be brought, and in 2 or 3 years' time, the case will be heard in full. And I have no doubt Israel will be found guilty of genocide. Once the International Court of Justice has established that a genocide occurred, I do not see how domestically in the UK it can be avoided charging Sunak with Sunak and Cameron, for example, with complicity in genocide, because they've been arming Israel to do this genocide, and they've been providing aerial surveillance, they've been sending in weapons from Cyprus, they've been giving intelligence support, they've been actively participating in the genocide. So once the ICJ makes it, and I did set all that, I said all of this in my initial articles of why the ICJ strategy was the way to go, because it brings in, once you've got a determination from the ICJ, the ICC has to act. The ICC would not otherwise act if they possibly could, because it's a dreadful, corrupt organization. But the ICC has been forced to act, because the ICJ was acting. And in domestic law, I don't see how you'll be able to avoid action once the ICJ has made its determination.
There are other candidates in this race that have been put up by Labour and people that are trying to split the vote, and they claim to be pro-Palestine. What sets you apart from them?
Well, I think a number of things, but the obvious one is, in fact, I joined Defence of Palestine in 1977. They've been very, very, very active on the subject. I had a gap. I couldn't be openly active on Palestine while I was in the diplomatic service, so there was a gap in that period of my life in openly pro-Palestinian activism. But even then, within the Foreign Office, what I was doing and trying to prevent extraordinary rendition and torture, etc., was all part of the same struggle. But yeah, I think obviously I've got a much longer track record, and bluntly, I operate at a much higher level. I can walk into the United Nations or the ICJ, and I meet people I know. There are 4 heads of state in this world that I can walk into their house now, and they'll be welcome as a guest because they know me. And I can give me more status as an MP, and it will enhance my ability to get things done even further. But it's simply a matter of, anyone has a right to stand in a general election. I don't want to criticize anybody for standing. That would be wrong. People have a right to stand. But if you are trying to help the Palestinians with your vote, the fact that the Palestinian Foreign Ministry have actually endorsed me because I work with them, I think is in itself sufficient argument. If your genuine concern is to help Gaza, then I think plainly I'm the person to vote for here in Blackburn.
In the off chance somebody says to you, that they're opposed indeed to what's happening in Gaza, but how does it relate to me in Britain? What would you respond to them?
2 things. The first point is that our inability to stop what's happening in Gaza, despite the fact the vast majority of people are against it, and the fact that both major parties in England and Wales, in England anyway, both major parties in England support Israel, shows that we don't have a real democracy. And if you vote,
because most people here are against it.
Because most people here are against it. If you vote either Labour or Tory, you are supporting the genocide, because the leaderships of both those parties support continuing arming Israel. And even when 60 Palestinian children get blown up in a single instant by a bomb, they rationalise that as Israel's right to self-defense. So if you vote Labour or Tory, you're supporting that. And the second point is, I am of course standing for the Workers' Party, who have a whole raft of radical domestic policies, and particularly renationalisation of the utilities, renationalisation of the water companies.
Because you're good on Gaza, but why would you be good for people in Blackburn on all these other issues, on the NHS, on tuition?
Yeah. Well, I'm quite simply, Labour has abandoned any idea of Keynesianism, of state intervention, or Labour has moved right of the tour. Labour is an out-and-out Thatcherite party now. I stand for the kind of old-fashioned socialist or social democratic values that people in Blackburn who voted Labour for years and years and years thought they were getting, and the party has now abandoned them. So if you want good public services, if you want, if you don't want utilities to be exploited for billions of profit by big business, but want them to actually provide utilities to people at a price they can afford, then you should vote for me.
My parents didn't work in the FCO, but they were in the diplomatic corps, so I know how it goes. But how did you go from being Britain's youngest ambassador to leaving that behind you and all the perks that come with that life, to being a whistleblower, exposing torture, working for to help Julian Assange's cause, working to help the Palestinian cause? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, it was quite a jolt, because it was, as you know, an extremely luxurious lifestyle. And to give all that up was difficult, and to give up a career at which I excelled. I was very good at it. I became Britain's youngest ambassador, and I undoubtedly would have finished my career as probably ambassador to Poland, then ambassador to Russia, something along those lines. And I gave it up because, firstly, I knew that we lied about the Iraq war. I knew that on Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, we were knowingly lying in order to start a war that killed millions of people, in order to seize oil and gas reserves. I mean, that's quite simply what it was. I knew that. And secondly, where I was encountering the fact that people were being tortured, subject to torture and extraordinary rendition by the CIA. We were complicit in it. In particular, we were getting the intelligence which the CIA were producing as a result of these torture sessions. And I tried to stop it, and I couldn't. As whistleblowers should, if you like. I tried internally to stop the illegal activity.
Right, you went through the chain of command.
I went through the chain of command, etc. Tried to get it all stopped. I was told that it wasn't illegal for us to get the intelligence from torture as long as we weren't doing the torture ourselves.
It's such a lawyer talk.
It was their chief lawyer who in person told me this. And I said, what about Article 6 of the Convention Against Torture, which talks of complicity? And he said, well, complicity, the meaning is not clear of complicity. I just couldn't live with my conscience if I carried on doing it. So I gave all that up. And because I then became a whistleblower, of course, I then moved into the WikiLeaks, Snowden, the whole field that's defined the rest of my life.
Tell me about being stopped under the Terrorism Act. Describe how this scene unfolded. You got off the plane, they came into the plane. What happened exactly?
Yeah, I was flying, and I'd been at a WikiLeaks meeting in Reykjavik, and I'd also attended a Palestine demonstration in Reykjavik. It was the 16th of October. I arrived at Glasgow airport. I went through passport control, and there were two men in suits and a smartly dressed woman waiting at a place which says police border control, waiting by the box.
So they were not in uniform, they were
in plain clothes. Okay. They called me over and they asked me if I was Craig Murray, and I said yes. And they scanned my passport with a device on his phone. And then they showed me some form of identity card, which, to be honest, I didn't really take in. And I should say this was a very early morning.
Who are they? Exact special branch or?
We are trying to discover that. We still don't really know exactly who they were. And I should say this was it was a very early morning flight, and I'd been up since about 2 a.m. and I was feeling pretty groggy, and I also wasn't actually feeling very well. So some of the details got a bit sketchy.
Yeah.
But they took me in and questioned me for an hour. And under Section 7 of the Terrorism Act, they can question you for an hour, and you're not allowed a lawyer. You must answer questions. You have no right to remain silent. You must answer them immediately and fully and truthfully. And you must hand over all your electronic devices and the passwords, and not to do any of those things.
Are these the same people who spoke to you for the remainder of the hour?
Yeah, it was the same people. And they questioned me about WikiLeaks, and particularly about WikiLeaks sources of funds, about my sources of funds. And they questioned me about Palestine and whether I attended Palestine demonstrations, who I attended with, how I judged who I'd share a platform with, what my views were on armed resistance. And then they let me go. But then a couple of days later, I got a letter saying I wasn't getting my devices back, as is normally done after 7 days, because I was under investigation under the Terrorism Act. And that's a further stage. The stop has been happening to a lot of journalists. It happened to Kit Klauenberg, it happened to Vanessa Beeley, it's happened to Joanna Ross, it's happened to 4 or 5 people I know. So that's not unusual. But to get a letter actually saying you are under investigation is unusual. That was unusual. Yeah.
I recall that it used to be they could stop you for about 8 hours, and I think they reduced it to 6. But you're saying they let you go after 1. Why do you think that is? Because you're saying that they were keeping you under investigation. It doesn't make sense.
After 1, you're entitled to a lawyer.
Okay.
And you have your normal rights kick in after 1. They can still.
So they probably wanted to avoid having a lawyer.
They wanted to avoid having a lawyer, and also after 1 hour you have the right to remain silent. You know, all your normal rights kick in after 1 hour. They can detain you longer, but then you have your normal rights.
Right, but the first hour you're basically
first hour, and the legislation was designed. It was built in 2001, I think, or 2002, and it was designed to it only applies at ports, and it was designed to combat people who had just placed a bomb on an airplane. That was the idea. It wasn't meant for journalists. The idea was that, you know, for an hour, if you just placed a bomb on an airplane, they said have you placed a bomb? You have to tell them.
Answer. Yeah, that's the point of it. Okay.
That's the point of it. Not in order to get at journalists. It's a total misuse of power. I mean, it's appalling.
Yeah. Do you find it ironic that Israelis or dual nationals go and commit genocide in Gaza and come back and they're not stopped? Because I've never heard of an Israeli being stopped under the Terrorism Act. Have you?
No, I'm quite sure they haven't. And I mean, one thing which I think is really, I think we should be acting to bring to justice anybody from the IDF who comes back to the UK. I think that's extremely important.
Do you think there's a difference between someone who goes to fight in ISIS and someone who goes to fight in the IDF?
No, I think it's extremely similar. I mean, both are committing atrocities in the name of a crazed religious ideology. And I would put ISIS and the IDF both on an equal moral footing.
I remember when you were in court in Scotland, I noticed mainstream media weren't bothering to report on it. I came in virtually and reported on it. I don't think you saw me or were allowed to know who was there, but I was there, I was present, and it was, I mean, the whole thing struck me as a circus and grossly unfair. Tell me a bit about that whole process, how it was for you, because they basically sent you to prison for allegedly identifying something that was in open court. I mean, it seems a bit bizarre, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very strange. The court was open. Anybody could go into that courtroom. The witnesses gave evidence in their own name. They were referred to by their names throughout in an open public court, but you weren't allowed to publish their names. But I didn't publish their names. That's the extraordinary thing. Nor did I publish any article which in itself could identify anybody. But what they said was that some of the things I published, like the fact one person had curly hair because the charge was that somebody pinged her curly hair. That was the charge of sexual assault, extraordinarily.
Yeah.
The fact I'd reported she had curly hair could help identify her to somebody else who worked in that office and knew which person had curly hair, for example. So, this was and I didn't get to speak in my own defence.
I know. Yeah.
The judge and the court.
They didn't let you say a word. It's like in Julian's.
Yeah. And on appeal, the court ruled that the written evidence I'd given by affidavit did not count as evidence. And I still have no idea why. And my lawyers still have no idea why. That was a ruling that totally baffled us. One of the articles for which I was convicted was written before the order was in place that made it illegal, allegedly.
So retroactive, essentially.
Yeah, retroactive legislation. Retroactive court order. The whole thing was just extraordinary and extremely frustrating. But anyway, I'm still here and still fighting.
Why do you think they targeted you over this whole Alex Salmond affair?
Yeah. Well, they couldn't get Alex. I mean, the charges were ludicrous. He was found not guilty. I've no doubt whatsoever that the entire thing was a state plot to put Alex Salmond in jail because he's an enemy of the state, or failing that, to smear him with sexual allegations, the same way they tried with Julian.
Right, essentially to kind of derail the whole independence.
To derail the independence movement. That's what it was about. They couldn't get him. Then they saw on a technicality they could get me without a nasty jury getting in the way. The judge can just send you to jail for contempt of court, and that's it. So I think partly it was kind of revenge at not getting Alex. But of course, they hate me. I'm a whistleblower, so I'm a class traitor to their.
Yeah.
From their point of view, I'm a traitor to the Foreign Office and the intelligence services. And I've continued then. My work with Julian Assange obviously annoys them enormously.
Yeah.
Sadly, I think I will always be a target. I'll always have a target on my back from the establishment, but I just have to live with it.
Yeah. And, I'll just ask you one last thing, Craig. When we'll see each other at Julian's court date in a few weeks, but what do you expect will happen? What kind of judgment will the High Court issue regarding the so-called assurances and Julian's points that he's brought forward about them?
Yeah. Well, we're really at the sharp end here. I'm actually quite hopeful, particularly if we get the same judges again we had last time, who seemed very sensible and to understand the case fully. I'm quite hopeful that on the point of discrimination by nationality, because they're saying a non-American acting outside the United States is not entitled to freedom of speech, First Amendment protection, and discrimination by nationality is contrary to the European Convention on Human Rights and contrary to the UK's own Extradition Act. I think on that almost technical point that the extradition will be quashed. It seems to me that the judges and the United States prosecution have painted themselves into a logical corner from which there is no escape. I know other people aren't. And there is every reason to be cynical because we've seen so many extraordinary rulings and extraordinary miscarriages of justice. Like the very basic one that the very treaty under which he is being extradited, which says no political extradition, has no force in domestic law, even though he's being extradited.
Exactly, it's ridiculous.
They are capable of making totally crazy arguments.
Yeah.
But on this one, they've been through this point so many times, and the judges have always stuck with it. I don't see how they can now withdraw it, this discrimination by nationality point. So I'm actually very hopeful. But this is it. This is the sharp end. I mean, either he's going to be released, or the extradition is going to go ahead, unless it can be stopped by the European Court of Human Rights, and they may well rush it through before a warrant can be got, a stop order can be got from the European Court of Human Rights. So I think, we may well see Julian either released or extradited within a month. We really are at the sharp end now.
Yeah, I'll just finish by saying we're back where we started essentially 2 years ago when we were talking about the assurances then, because that's what the entire case has been about. And I did a lot of work on Mendoza's case, and because the whole premise is, can we trust the Americans? Can we trust them? And the answer is no. And we have another direct comparison where someone is extradited from a European Council country to the US under promises, and that was a legal contract and a binding one, and they still broke it. And what Julian's getting is much weaker, and he has a giant political target on his back, and the judges found nothing wrong with it. So you'll forgive me, I am more on the cynical end.
Well, except that on this occasion, the Americans aren't pretending to give the assurance. I think the judges have already accepted ludicrous assurances in this case. But on this case, the judges have asked for a specific assurance, and rather than give the assurance and break it, the Americans haven't given it. And that's a different thing. That's a different thing. And that's why I'm reasonably optimistic.
Craig Murray, thank you very much.
Thank you.